So there's a little something I want to talk about today, and it's not the most exciting topic when you first think of it, but it's something that is incredibly important when you have hired someone or if you have someone on your team who is leaving. And it's something that isn't required by a lot of organizations, but it's something that I believe deeply in. It's something that I think should really be considered, and that is documentation. Documentation can mean a lot of different things, but it's just some sort of documenting, whether it is literally in a Word document or in a Google Doc, or whether it's videos, but it's just something that shows how that person did their job. I've seen this so many times, whether I personally or someone on my team is taking over a contract for an organization, if they had somebody in that position in the past, or whether I'm creating materials to hand over to an organization. Documentation is so important. It's the reason that when I'm doing a branding project, I am always sure to create a really robust brand guidelines document that shows that organization how to use everything that I've created for them. But it's something that I just don't see very often, and that just drives me crazy from a personal standpoint, because you're creating all this guesswork that doesn't need to happen. It's a very simple thing. If someone is leaving a position, to have them in their 2 weeks or however long of notice they've given you to just sit down and write out what they do every day, or if it's not every day, how they complete the tasks that are assigned to them. And right now I'm offboarding a client who's no longer fitting with what I'm offering. And so I'm going through and creating documentation for literally everything. And I have like a 10-page document going. I'm creating videos to go along with everything, because when I'm not there anymore, I don't want their existing brand to fall through the cracks. I don't want anything to fall through the cracks that doesn't need to be there. And so my tips for creating something like this is one, simply just to sit down and think about what you do in your job. What are those specific tasks? If somebody sat down, what do they need to know? And I think that it's very easy just to assume that people know certain things or that they've been trained, but every single person has a different background and a different way of doing things. And of course, it can be tweaked further down the road, but there is so much value in simply stating how you do something. And so that's my number one thing, is literally sit down and write out everything and write out the steps you do to do those things, and really take the time to do this. It's a great way to kind of fill up that time. When you might have a couple of weeks left in a job and you're kind of offboarding everything else, it's a great way to kind of sit down and make sure stuff is done. And then number two is to create some sort of visual element of this. So literally, again, walking people through. If it's a video, I love to use Loom for something like this. It's free. It's a Google Chrome browser extension. And I think that's a great way to do it as well, because people learn differently, and sometimes people need to actually see how something is done, especially in design, branding, communications, things like that. And you can physically show people how to do it so that the visual learners and the reading style learners both kind of see how this is done in their own way. And there's just no excuses. There's no reason why they can't pick up right where you left off. And so those are my two big tips. And of course, to present that, and I guess number three, to present this to whoever is going to either be taking over your position, or if there's no one in that place yet, to present this to the person who's going to be overseeing that person or the project manager, and ensure there's no questions, and ensure there's nothing that you missed or anything that they might need a little additional clarification on, or they might not understand, just to make sure that you're on the same page and there's no panic. There's no having to reinvent the wheel, and making sure this company is in a good place whenever you move on. And so that the next person who comes in doesn't have to start from square one. And it's just something that I see over and over again, the lack of value of documentation. And to me, this is the most important thing. It's really showing people how to make something cohesive and to continue this line, and really have a through line through everything so that everything makes sense and it's just a way to continue things. And in terms of branding, that's really important to have consistency and to have clarity in everything that you do. And so again, that's the reason that whenever I'm working with that smaller branding client, I always have a super robust brand guidelines document. But this is more for an ongoing relationship. It's just as important and just as valuable. So again, creating that documentation in terms of written documentation, video documentation, and going over it with whoever is taking over for you, or a project manager, just to make sure everything makes sense. And so those are my three top tips for documentation. If you have other tips or other thoughts on this, I would love to hear from you about them. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you love documentation as much as me, give me a quick like. Thanks.